Game over. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for March 11th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. I think another way that you could distinguish between Brendan and I is that he is mild Mickey and I am habanero Mickey.
Come on. I love spicy food. I think you have that reversed, man.
Yeah, in terms of food, I do think that is probably correct. I am not a spice head.
I mean,
In terms of the habanero kind, maybe in terms of the Dune kind.
Okay,
but not
that
the
kind of spice. Sure, it's a very
habanero
different
kind.
level of spice. I would say I'll take the ghost pepper spice. That's how much I want it.
Yeah, no, I don't really care for. Well, let me rephrase. I like spicy food when it is appropriate. When it is utterly ridiculous and it's just there for heat's sake, count me out. Then I don't care all that much.
Is that your way of saying you didn't really like Mickey 17?
No, that's not at all what I'm saying.
Okay.
We're just talking about food here.
I don't know, because this is a pretty spicy movie. It really adds a lot of flavor to spice things up a bit.
But again, let me reiterate by saying, when the film has the right kind of spice, I am there for it. It's when it's indulging in the wrong ways, that's where I don't care for it.
So when it's, this might sound terrible to say, when it's filtered through a bong, right?
Filtered through the right, yeah.
The right
Filtered
filmmaker.
the right way.
Filtered through the right filmmaker.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so our reviews this week are going to be really interesting. I joked about this on the main show this last week, but I'll reiterate it here. I do think it's really interesting that we're going to be talking about two movies that co-star Steven Yeun. One of them is in a Robert Pattinson film, and the other is in a Kristen Stewart film. And we definitely did that on purpose.
Oh, we absolutely
I am
did.
going
Because,
to
yeah,
stick with that story.
because we just absolutely love Twilight.
Yeah, 100%. We are Twilight heads. 100%. All joking aside, though, and the irony, of course, is that both Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson have gone on to have these phenomenal careers post Twilight.
Yeah.
Honestly, two of our best working actors today.
Oh, absolutely.
Love both of them.
They're making very interesting choices, and they're doing very interesting work.
Yeah. Both of them for
Yeah.
years now.
Yeah.
They've both been doing great work. And over the course of the last few months or so, obviously Mickey 17 just came out this weekend. Love Me, I think, came out on digital about a month ago or so. So it's been out a little bit longer. But both of them, weird movies. Let's just go ahead and put that out on the table. They both have a little spice to them. They're both a little strange in their own quirky ways that we'll talk about. And they both co-star Steven Yeun, which I just find hilarious.
That's we totally planned that. We totally planned that.
100%. So I do love how that has played out.
Yeah.
And in full transparency, it's going to be even more interesting because Brendan and I are recording both of these reviews on the same night. We're doing them back to back. So it's just going to be a Steven Yeun fest that includes Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson along for the ride, which is going to be fun.
Post Walking Dead, we just praised Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart of this, but post Walking Dead, Steven Yeun is also making some really interesting choices.
He is.
This is not his first time working with Bong Joon Ho. They worked together on Okja not too long ago. So he's also making some interesting choices as well. We gotta give him some credit for that.
He is. No, he's always doing fun, fascinating things as well. I do love him. This is going to be a really fun night. I do look forward to releasing both of these episodes. Of course, we are starting off here with Mickey 17. And aside from the festivities of the evening, really the big talking point is that this is Bong Joon Ho's first film since winning an Oscar in 2019 for Parasite. I cannot believe it's been 6 years. How on earth?
Since winning, what, 3 Oscars, technically, I guess?
Yeah.
Was he? Well, yeah, I guess it was 3 because he was a producer on Parasite, even though the Best International Oscar went to the country of South
Yes.
Korea. But he did win for writing and directing alongside Best Picture as well. So, yeah, he won 3 Oscars, the first ever foreign language film to win that award. And this is what he follows that up with.
Yeah. And that's the exciting thing about the Oscars. You know, I will sit here, I give award season a hard time. I don't love that we've turned art into sports, but I do understand that from a business perspective, there are fascinating things that come out of it. Recently, there have been talking points about Anora and its box office surprises around the world after it won Best Picture. Obviously, that was going to happen. I think I saw a stat that in Australia, it skyrocketed like 800% at the box office.
That's
and I'm not
insane.
exaggerating. It was like
insane.
800%. So, yeah, the Oscars, it does matter. From a business perspective, from a marketing perspective, they do matter. I totally get it. I just hate the execution of award season for a variety of reasons we've talked about a million times.
That's fair.
This is another one of those consequences. I say complimentary, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where you win an Oscar and you get these opportunities. And with actors, they're in all kinds of things, right? And we've talked about that with various actors over the years. Directors are often given blank checks. You won an Oscar for directing, for writing, for Best Picture. Blank check. Here you go. Bong Joon Ho, what do you want to do?
So what's, I guess on that token, what's Sean Baker's next blank check going to be?
You know, that is a really fascinating question, right? Because Sean Baker, when you think of a Sean Baker film, and I guess this is adjacent to Bong Joon Ho as well. You think of a Sean Baker film, and there are these indie darlings that explore the gritty blue collar areas of America.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, selfishly, I don't want him to stray too far from that nucleus. But at the same time, if he's given an opportunity to get paid, which I'm sure he wants to get paid, is he going to do something more ambitious like a Mickey 17? I don't think he's going to take on a Marvel or DC or anything like that. I don't think he's going to do franchise.
No.
But he could do something where he goes outside of his wheelhouse and does something big in a Mickey 17 kind of way. I could see that happening.
Basically, it's the opportunity for him to do whatever he wants without any interference.
Exactly.
Which is ironic because with Mickey 17, we can kind of call this a blank check for Bong Joon Ho, but there were a lot of reports between him and Warner Brothers that may not have made this a blank check if Bong didn't get his way. And based on the final product, it seems like Bong Joon Ho got his way, and we're thankful for that.
Yeah, I really the big difference here, because it's not as if Bong Joon Ho has been making blockbuster movies either. He hasn't. Okja, however, was not a small movie. That was made for around $50 million, and it was made for Netflix. That is a big boy studio these days. They will pay, as we all know with their recent Russo brothers project. Good Lord. They will spend the money for better or worse. Mostly for worse.
Mostly for worse. You're right. You're right. I'm not going to whisper it. I'll just say it. Mostly for worse.
Mostly for worse. But look, I have to give Netflix some credit. We give them a hard time for spending $350 million on a Russo brothers movie. But they gave $50 million to Bong Joon Ho to make Okja. I will take that. And they have plenty of examples along those lines as well. It's not just Bong Joon Ho. You know, they did Roma in 2018.
The Irishman's another big one.
The Irishman. Netflix will spend the money, and they'll do it on auteurs. They'll do it on filmmakers that we love. It's not just the Russos of the world.
Yeah.
They balance themselves out in a lot of ways. However, and I don't know what the process was like with Okja. You know, Netflix generally has a reputation for not being too involved, but it might depend on the project and what it is. I don't think Okja was one of their priorities, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think that I have to do the research. That film came out in 2017. It's been a long time, so I could be misremembering, but I don't think they were dipping their toes into the Okja waters.
What a weird movie that was. What a weird movie. And Netflix let it stay a weird movie.
Yeah.
So I will give them credit for that as well.
But this is the first time Bong Joon Ho has gone to the conventional Hollywood system with Warner Brothers behind the helm here for Mickey 17. And you know, this had a healthy budget, right? This was $118 million in terms of the budget. So for all the money that Netflix gave to Bong Joon Ho for Okja, this almost doubled and a half the budget of Okja.
It's a risk because at that point, with that budget, it has to make what, like 300 or not 300. It has to make around 300, maybe 275, I think, at the minimum in order to break even. But still, that's a healthy number for a movie like this. So Warner Brothers certainly took a gamble on the film, and it's certainly not surprising that there was apparently some tension between Bong Joon Ho and Warner Brothers about the iteration of this film that we were going to get. From what I understand, that's where some of the delays for the film came to be, really due to that confrontational dynamic between Bong and Warner Brothers. But like I said, we seem to have gotten the movie that Bong Joon Ho wanted to give us. And that's what's exciting to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty well known, but just in case, this film was meant to come out at the end of 2023, I think was the original intent, but then it got an original release date of early 2024. That got pushed back several different times. And then
it was at one point delayed indefinitely, I think was the word that they used.
Yeah, crazy.
We actually thought we weren't ever going to get it at one point.
Yeah, the film was certainly in limbo for quite a while as they were trying to navigate the behind the scenes post production. What was this film going to end up being? Yeah. Ultimately, Bong Joon Ho got his way. We get the movie that we get. Is it going to make $300 million at the box office? Unless a miracle occurs, probably not, but we shall see. We shall see. Hopefully this has some legs at the box office. It currently stands at $45 million worldwide.
Maybe Australia will save the day like they're doing for Enora.
Maybe. Who knows? Who knows? I'm sure this still has many more markets to open to.
Maybe. Yeah.
It's early, and we've seen this a couple of times now where, you know, even going back to December, Mufasa struggled out of the gate. Everyone lost their goddamn mind. And now that movie's made like $900 million worldwide. Yeah. It did fine. It did perfectly fine. It just did okay. It was the slow and steady race for Mufasa.
I hope that happens with Mickey 17. I would be surprised if that still happened for a movie like this.
I agree. I'm not expecting that to happen. That is Mufasa after all, and it's this Disney movie.
But it has happened to movies in general before, where they've had this slow climb to profitability.
Yes. So if more people go out and see it, if it gets good word of mouth, I don't know if this film is getting good word of mouth. I haven't seen the audience scores, to be perfectly honest, but I'm guessing
is there a cinema score for this yet?
I'm sure there is, and I would almost bet my mortgage that it's polarized.
It's a B. That's not too bad. That's not too bad.
That's better than I anticipated.
It's better than Captain America: Brave New World.
Look at that. Better than Captain America: Brave New World. What a brave new world we live in. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
At any rate, it is great to have Bong Joon Ho back in the cinema landscape. That is very, very exciting. With without further ado, are you ready to jump into this?
Oh yeah, this is gonna be fun.
This is going to be fun. All right. Mickey 17. It is based on the 2022 novel Mickey 7, which I have not read.
Same
I
here.
don't know if you've read it.
Same
not.
here by Edward Ashton, I believe the author's name was.
Yes. I have not read it. So we won't have any sort of novel context coming into this. But the film, written and directed by Bong Joon Ho, and it stars Robert Pattinson, Naomi Ackie, Stephen Yeun, Toni Collette, Mark Ruffalo, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Mickey 17, it is about, and you'll never guess this, Mickey 17. He is known as an expendable and goes on a dangerous journey to colonize an ice planet, which is not really true. I don't know who
No, that is a
that
bad
synopsis, but that is objectively false.
that is the actual plot synopsis.
Yeah,
oh my
that's
gosh,
it.
who the hell wrote that?
My guess is Warner Brothers wrote that because they're not the sharpest knives in the shed.
Are they trying to sell this like an epic hero's journey kind of thing or something?
I don't know. I don't know, but that has Warner Brothers written all over it, and that is not correct. Mickey 17 is part of a group of people that go on a dangerous journey to an ice planet, but he is not the one doing the colonizing.
He is not the
by any stretch
colonizer.
of the
No,
imagination.
the colonizer that I'm sure we'll talk about is someone entirely different that may or may not be a real life figure. I'll simply say that.
Yeah. Played by Mark Ruffalo. We'll just go ahead and lay that out. Kenneth Marshall is the character's name. Mark Ruffalo, the performer. He is our villain of this movie, alongside his wife, played by Toni Collette. All right, let's jump into this. That laid out. Brendan, what did you think about Mickey 17?
There's one aspect of this movie that automatically makes it great for me. And it's when you look at Bong Joon Ho's entire filmography, this is a man that has made some of the greatest South Korean films ever made, including Parasite, which made history, as we already talked about. But he has made English language films before. He has worked within at least a sliver of the Hollywood system before. Maybe not the grander Hollywood system, but he has participated in it at the very least. And when most foreign filmmakers make that transition, it usually leads to maybe unfortunate circumstances, to say the least. A lot of times they end up just being a hired gun, or they don't really get the chance to make the movie that they want. But leave it to Bong Joon Ho, whose most ambitious and weirdest movies are the one in the English language. I absolutely love that. That alone makes Mickey 17 an awesome movie. I'm sure we'll talk about some of the loose term nuances that this movie is going for, which are very few and far between. But man, is this movie a lot of fun. I had so much fun with it. And it's because it is just so self-aware. And Bong Joon Ho is a very gifted filmmaker on one hand, but he also has a killer sense of humor. I think that right there is why this movie ultimately worked for me. It is not going to be one of the deeper films in his filmography as far as one that I like to think about or analyze or maybe even find myself emotionally perplexed by. But it might be the one I rewatched the most. This is most comparable to something like Okja, but I think it's it's certainly a tighter version than that because we have a more centralized group of characters to follow this time around. So I think it has that tightness to it that maybe Okja didn't quite have, although I do appreciate the looseness of that movie and how ambitious that it was. But this is wildly ambitious in its tone, in its visuals. The fact that this was backed by a company like Warner Brothers is honestly astounding. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time with this one. I cannot wait to talk about this one further.
I had the time of my life with this film. I absolutely enjoyed it as well. On one hand, it is Bong Joon Ho completely untethered, having a ball making this film, ambitious. It is weird. It is all kinds of messy. I don't know if it sticks the landing as far as its exposition and plotting is concerned, but on the same token, it doesn't seem all that concerned with its world building, at least from a dramatic perspective. It mostly serves the film's romanticism and thematic underbelly, and that's what Bong is mostly concerned with, I think. This film is first and foremost a romance between Mickey and Nasha. Part of the reason we love 17 is Pattinson's charming and goofy performance. He is so wonderful here. But we also root for him because Nasha is the only one who takes any time to really understand him. Everyone else, including Mickey's supposed best friend Timo, played by Stephen Yeun here, treats him as, well, expendable.
Yeah.
The dynamic between 17 and Nasha is really, really great and endearing. And I think there's a lot of fun to be had here with the bizarre experimenting and goofy shenanigans we see with 17. And it gets even crazier once 18 gets involved. It goes to a whole new level. Now, on the other side of the coin with this film, it's director Bong again dabbling into socio-political commentary. And like his previous movies, he is not subtle here, like at all. No subtlety in any way, shape, or form. There has been a lot of talk about the parallels between Ruffalo and Colette's very over-the-top performances to our current political regime here in the United States. But much of that discourse, I think, is very much missing the point or drawing too much from those parallels. Although, admittedly, the parallels are very eerie. The images of Kenneth Marshall, again, played by Mark Ruffalo here, his wife, played by Toni Collette, throughout a lot of this film, she is whispering into the ear of Marshall and deviously controlling him like a puppet. That does hit a little close to home. It does evoke something, I think, quite visceral for a lot of us here in the United States. So I get it. I totally get it. But I think that's merely a coincidence because this is a film that, as we noted, was delayed several times and was originally developed back in 2021. Before the novel even came out, they announced they were doing this film with Bong Joon Ho attached to write and direct. This film was not anticipating an election in any way whatsoever, especially when it was wrapped sometime in late 2023. Ruffalo's imitative performance is awfully brazen, don't get me wrong. I mean, at one point early on in the film, he literally does the Trump dance. And overall, his mannerisms are transparent.
It's an SNL sketch. It is an SNL sketch for this particular individual.
I agree. And again, there's no way he was anticipating our political climate in 2025 when they filmed this. There have been Trump-like characters for decades, long before he came into power. He is an archetype that has been around for a long time. And I think that's primarily what Ruffalo and Collette were tapping into, especially because, as our great editor-in-chief, Dave Giannini, who wrote the Mickey 17 review for us at InSessionFilm.com, he wrote in his review, the Marshalls are mostly symbolic of humanity's worst instincts and how easily we can be corralled by bad actors. And I agree with that. What they do in this film, their grand plan, is something we've seen throughout history. What we're seeing today, and by proxy in this film, is just the latest version of it. And Bong's answer to those bad actors, again, not subtle at all, but I find it really, really incredible. And in this case, a lot of fun. A lot of fun. So I was not at all disengaged by or distracted by the political parallels that is in this film.
No,
in fact, I think the film utilizes them in a really great way that I found extremely diverting.
Well, it's just a lot of fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously in that regard. I'd say the level of nuance and complexity here is not too far off from, let's say, maybe someone like an Adam McKay, for instance. I don't think it's that far off as far as the deepness, but the difference here is that Bong Joon Ho is a good filmmaker with a good sense of humor and knows
Yeah.
how to take advantage of it to let it stick with you, even if it's not necessarily challenging you. Because the film overall, just the overarching, or at least one of the overarching messages here, is is something we've seen before many times, not just in film, but also from Bong Joon Ho specifically, a group that honors privilege and disregards those who do the necessary hard work to essentially keep us alive. That's essentially what this is. You can parallel that to anything that's sociopolitical, like you're saying. You can even parallel it to related issues within the healthcare industry as well. I think that also plays a part into it as well. It's not subtle. But man, does Bong Joon Ho just have a really biting sense of humor and a self-awareness that ultimately makes it work for me. And
Yeah.
that's ultimately why I didn't mind that. I actually admire the commitment of not just Bong Joon Ho, but also Mark Ruffalo's performance and Toni Collette's performance. They're clearly being directed to do that, and I have to admire that commitment. I really do.
No, I completely agree. I think their performances are fantastic. I know there's been some discourse, some debate about Mark Ruffalo and the goofiness that he brings to something like this. We saw it a little bit in Poor Things as well, and I loved him in Poor Things. I really like what he's doing here. Again, I don't care about how brazen it is. In fact, that's the quality I like about it, and I think he's able to have a lot of fun by tapping into these maniacal qualities in a way that services both of those films. Same thing with Toni Collette here as well. What I love about Bong Joon Ho as a filmmaker, though, is that he's able to, at least for me, balance out the diverting qualities of this film and its incredible over-the-top satire, which is great, with an underlying pathos that I did find really effective. And I think
that's the difference.
I completely agree. I think the best way for me to articulate why I find this film so effective on a thematic and emotional level, I go back to friend of the show, and she now writes for InSessionFilm.com, which I love, the great Wonder Meg. She had a tweet that was going around film Twitter that I thought was great, where she said, "Life is precious, work sucks. The saying, if you died today, they'd replace you tomorrow, has been at the top of my mind the last few months. Mickey 17 is a reminder that we are more than our work, to be patient and kind with ourselves, even versions of ourselves we don't recognize," end quote. I could not have said that more succinctly.
That's well said. That's well said.
I think she nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. To the evils of capitalism, we are nothing more than expendable bodies that are easily replaced the next day. They'll use you to death and feel no remorse for it. It's an idea that is taken to the extreme in this film, but it's one that many of us, if not all of us, can relate with. And the result of that kind of exploitation is a fractured identity, where part of ourselves want to stand up to tyranny and try to kill the forces that are smothering us. But of course, there's always the timid, pragmatic part of ourselves that try to maintain status quo just to survive. I absolutely love how director Bong taps into that duality here with 17 and 18 respectively. They are clearly acting as both sides of that spectrum, and to see Mickey's fractured identity become the thing that saves him in the end is incredibly hopeful and surprisingly very moving, especially when you couple that with Nasha's unwavering support and love. That's why I love this film, despite how messy it may be. I don't know if all of its world building works, as I noted in my opening thoughts.
Oh, it absolutely doesn't. It absolutely does not work at all. It is filled with the biggest contrivances you can imagine for a film like this, and I don't care. I just don't care.
And ultimately, I don't care either, because those ideas and how they're executed here, again, with the performances, Pattinson, and how he's able to tap into that specific spectrum with 17 and 18, the dynamic between Mickey and Nasha, and that romance, that element of the film is really great, is so good that it makes up for
This, yeah,
whatever the messiness is in the plotting.
this kind of falls into a similar category as The Substance from last year, the Coralie Farjah film, which I think is technically a better film and a more seamless film in its plotting and world building, just overall construction, if you will. But that's a film that was very obvious and very blunt in its messaging, but it was designed to make you feel what it wanted to convey as opposed to think about what it wanted to convey, right? And I think Mickey 17 is doing something kind of similar, because where it might be a bit, I'm trying to say this carefully because I don't mean this as a negative. I think some of these themes are on their face a little bit redundant. We've seen these in movies over decades, right? But what matters is if there's an earnestness to it, and there absolutely is an earnestness to this movie.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And that's why it ultimately works, and that earnestness comes through in its playful energy, the fact that it doesn't take itself too seriously. If it did, I think I'd have more to criticize about what it's trying to tell us, and the fact that there is a sweetness to the characterization here. I actually I love the romance between Mickey and Nasha for sure, but I actually love the dynamic between Mickey 17 and Mickey 18 even more. There's kind of a buddy bromance forming between the two of them, and that was really fun to watch. And all of this makes for a very, for lack of a better term, a very sweet and tender experience, despite the obviousness that it has underneath. And that's what saves it for me.
No, I completely agree. And the interesting thing about what you're saying in terms of the fundamental themes of this film, how redundant it might be, it certainly isn't reinventing the wheel in any sort of way. I think what's fun about that is it's not even, that doesn't just apply broadly, that applies to Bong Joon Ho himself. Like he's tackled these themes before in his own movies. And yet he's going back to that well once again. But to your point, as we've been talking about, the execution here is really sincere. This film is having a lot of fun. I think it takes itself, I don't want to say seriously, but again, there's some sincerity to it when it needs to be. And it's just completely off the wall goofy when the film calls upon that as well. And I think it gets that balance very, very right here. And I'm able to have a fun, and you couple that with its accidental parallels. And again, to reiterate, I really do think a lot of it is accidental, but that does add to the fun for me when you look at Kenneth and his wife, the whispering of Toni Collette in Mark Ruffalo's ear, how that very much tethers to images, not just broadly speaking of 2025, as we are recording this, images that came out today. It is remarkably evocative of what we see in this film between the Marshalls here, which I think is absolutely hilarious. So like that accidental element of the film, and I know a lot of people have even been talking about how this film crystallizes and what that might evoke as far as how we handle certain leaders like this. I'm not necessarily saying that people should do that. I don't think that's the answer.
I don't know if rebellion's the answer in that way, but
I don't think so either. But I do find those accidents to be an extra element of the film that I very much did enjoy, even if they are accidents. So I think on its own terms, it's great for all the reasons we've been talking about. But you add that little, like those nuances, and it just made the experience, I think, all the more exciting.
I like to think of it as an accident because I think it makes the that predictiveness more interesting. At the same time, I do kind of wonder, and this is maybe just me sort of playing the conspiracy theory side of things. The way that the final minutes are edited almost made me think for a brief moment, was this constructed in a way to give us a new ending depending on how the election results turned out? Like, was there something that was inserted at the end to play a part in all of this? Because I feel like you could have ended this movie differently had the election results turned out a different way. I do wonder if that was part of the narrative as to why this movie was delayed so heavily. Again, I'm not betting my
We
money
don't
on
know.
that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what I think happened, but I would honestly laugh my ass off if that was part of the conversation. Because I think, yeah, you could end this movie maybe a little bit earlier and it has a slightly different, maybe hopeless message to it in a different side of things that could have maybe not necessarily parallel, but almost created more of like a perpendicular relationship to the way current events have turned out, which I think could have been interesting in its own right. I don't know. It's fun to speculate about those things because Bong Joon Ho is a very intelligent man. So I do kind of wonder, as someone like him who is an outsider looking into this sociopolitical landscape, if he's able to see some of those things that we who live within it are just too blind to see because we're too closely tied to it. I do wonder about that.
Well, a couple of responses to that. One, some of what we see here with the Marshalls could simply be that's what's in the novel. And I haven't read the novel, so I don't know. Now, the novel isn't all that old. It came out in 2022. So my best guess is that the novel and therefore the film is probably some sort of response to the first time Trump was in office. I do think that is at the very least partially the case here for sure. Because again, they had no idea what the election results were going to be. They were years removed when they started filming this back in 2022 and in 2023. They had no idea how this was all going to play out. So I do think that's part of it. But when you look at, the timing of the first Trump term to where things were, going after the pandemic, there's no doubt that they wanted to incorporate elements. I mean, as I noted earlier, there's a scene early on in the film with Ruffalo where he does the Trump dance. So they clearly wanted to incorporate some of that without knowing where things were going to go. And there is a plotting element early on where we find out that Kenneth Marshall had lost 2 elections. So there might have been a little bit of foreshadowing as far as what they hoped, how they, what they were anticipating perhaps with the election. I don't know. But I think given where the rest of the film goes, it was less about anticipating an election and more so building something around its sincerity. But to your point, maybe they did change the ending, in a conspiratorial way. But I don't I just don't know, because all those conversations with Warner Brothers would have been taken before the election, right? Because this was supposed to come out in early 2024. I just can't fathom that Warner Brothers, like this huge corporation, is going to be like, no, let's wait and see.
Well, it's not I mean, it'd be funny if that was the conversation very directly. But there's a moment in the film's final minutes, and I'm going to try to be vague so I don't spoil anything, but it simply involves an element of a dream sequence, I'll simply say. Okay, there's a certain cut that reveals maybe a dream sequence might be happening.
Yeah.
I think the movie could have possibly ended originally before that sequence actually happened.
That sequence could have been new.
Sequence could have been new, and that could have maybe been the part that plays into how these results turned out, to maybe add a more hopeful message to it. Because without that, and if this movie were to come out before the election, you have straight up propaganda here. You have a straight up propaganda piece, and maybe that's something Warner Brothers was afraid of. It's interesting if that may have been part of the conversation that's been had behind the scenes. I would love to be a fly on the wall. I would love to be a fly on the wall to see what those conversations were like.
I mean, given the lack of subtlety here, that could have been what concerned Warner Brothers, and they simply wanted to wait until after the election either way. I don't really know. But the other thing too, and other people have pointed this out, Bong Joon Ho doesn't live in the United States. I don't know
No.
how steeped he is in American politics outside of the broad general strokes of what's happening. And I think you can sense that based off the kind of broad archetypes that he's playing with here.
Yeah. Knowing Bong Joon Ho, he's the kind of person that would say, "Oh, this Trump-like figure has a weird personality. He would fit my movie." Like it's probably to the extent of that.
Well, and that's why I wanted to emphasize in my opening thoughts that yes, the parallels are eerie because we're living in a reality where Trump is in office, but that archetype has existed for decades at this point. Decades and decades. So drawing inspiration from that, again, is something that is understandable. It's something that we've seen many times before. And he might have just been speaking to that broadly, again, to emphasize the idea that people are somehow drawn to those kind of figures.
Sure.
And believe the lies, believe the gaslighting, and they're able to create these cultures that is kind of hard to wrap your mind around. And I think for me, I think the film is working mostly in broad strokes as it relates to those archetypes. So
Yeah.
I don't think it would have mattered how the election played out. And I think the way my best guess is that the way Bong Joon Ho crafted the end of this film, I don't think he had the election in mind at all.
Knowing him,
think
he probably
cared.
didn't. No, knowing him, he probably didn't. He just wanted to make a fun movie that maybe had some parallels to certain things, certain superficial things.
Yeah, especially because the beginning of all of this for him started in 2021. Like long before, way long before the election was ever going to take place.
For all we know, he probably sees it as more of a reflection of his own people, which he kind of did in Snowpiercer in a way, right? So by having a line of dialogue that's uttered by Mark Ruffalo here saying that they want to create a colony on this planet of, quote, pure white superior people, I think is what he says.
Yeah.
So maybe that's not just within the sociopolitical landscape of America. Maybe there is a worldly notion to this we can certainly infer as well.
Well, and again, like a lot of that behavior, while we are sadly seeing a lot of it today as well, you can easily go back to, let's say, the 1940s or the Roman Empire, like those kind of like bad actors that are convincing people of their plans that are made in bad faith. I mean, that is the history of humankind.
It's universal.
It is extremely universal.
For lack of a better term, it's cloning, right?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back.
It's another Mickey.
Yeah, I mean, you can go back to the Catholic Church, the Christian Church, like so much of the world history as we know it to be is defined by bad actors acting in bad faith. They might not have had the specific Trump qualities necessarily. That is certainly perhaps a little specific to this film. But the general archetype, the general idea of how they're behaving is a tale as old as time. So
that's why I do wonder how this movie is going to age in maybe 20 years. Like, will people look at this as just another example of that thing you're talking about, or will this end up becoming a Trump movie? You know, like in a way like that.
I don't like. I think when you get 50 years removed from Trump, you go back and look at this film, and I think people will simply look at it as, you know, the Mark Ruffalo character is indicative of
whoever
Trump,
the current president may be at that time too. Like maybe 50 years from now they'll try to
bad actor.
They'll try to draw to current political affiliations of that time. Yeah,
because that's what a lot of politicians or any sort of emperors try to do. Right.
Yeah,
because it's not just Trump, right? We're talking about Nazi Germany, Napoleon, a lot of going back to the early beginnings of the Christian church, like a lot of history is
Yeah. Well, yeah,
is
and
this.
I do want to. I know we're kind of going back and forth here, but I do ultimately agree with you that this is a movie that, even though there are certainly some specifics, it's I personally think in 10, 20, 50 years or whatever, people are going to be looking at it in a very high level way. That this is just another one of these overarching examples that has plagued many different affiliations over the years to varying
Yeah,
degrees.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
think people will be caught up in the specifics. I'm seeing some reactions on Twitter that are calling people idiots for not agreeing that this is a quote unquote Trump movie. And honestly, screw you guys. Like, because it's like, that is honestly just as rude as you can be. Because like it's giving Bong no credit for being a little bit transferable with these ideas. Like that it
Yeah.
can still translate in different eras. You're like, by saying that, you're simply saying it only can exist in this specific sliver of time.
No. I feel like the only specificity here is in some of the mannerisms in Ruffalo's performance.
Sure, yeah.
And I am willing to admit, I mentioned that in my opening thoughts. I do think that he is pulling from Trump specifically for some of his mannerisms, for sure, because that's the time we live in now. If this film was made in 1942, guess who he'd be pulling from? A different dictator at that time.
Yeah.
If it was the 1700s, they would be pulling from Napoleon. Like, you know, of course they're going to speak to the times now. And that's what gives the film some specificity, and that's what makes it interesting, I think. But the general broad stroke archetype,
it's not
tropes that they're
only
pulling
it's
from,
not only going to exist within this 4 year
no,
term.
yes, I agree. I agree. I think this film will transcend time and space in that regard because it is extremely universal. It is the history of the world as we know it to be.
Yeah.
I do think this film will have some staying power in that regard. And I think it's also a lot of fun. It's a bit goofy. I think this could be one of those films too that in another 20, 30 years time is reevaluated. And I use that term somewhat loosely because this film isn't getting bad reviews. It's
not getting bad reviews. It's not getting rave reviews.
Yes.
And I don't think it's like, I'm not sure if it's going to necessarily be one of those films that's reevaluated as like a secret masterpiece. I think if anything, it's just going to be one of those cult following type things.
Yeah, that's ultimately what I was trying to get at. I think this is going to be a film that people really come around to, that have, they have a lot of fun with, and they understand the broad strokes that Bong Joon Ho is playing with. Robert Pattinson's performance, I think, is really going to be perhaps the element of the film that gets the reappraisal in a more, I hate to use the word serious way, but I think people will really come around
maybe
on
in a
the
more
duality of this
objective way.
performance.
He's actually doing some good creative work here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you. I don't think this will get, reevaluated in the way like, I don't know, Spielberg's AI or something like that, which people are starting to realize is actually a masterpiece. Sorry, Dave, I love you, but yes, AI is absolutely a masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece.
I don't think that word will be thrown around for Mickey 17 necessarily, but I think it will find an audience.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And again, to reiterate, I think what I love about Pattinson's performance is two things. One, the dynamic that he is conveying, acting against himself. There's a great distinctive quality between 17 and 18 that is really fun, right? 18 is more formidable. He's confident. He has a brazen quality of himself. 17 is timid and is frightened and scared. And I love what that means on a symbolic level, because I do think that a lot of us, we live our lives day to day as 17, where we are expendable, but there's not much we can do about it. And we have to live a little bit pragmatically, because you can't afford to not have a job these days.
Yeah.
But on the same token, there's perhaps this element of ourselves where if we tapped into some sort of confidence, we could fight back against those that are trying to suppress you.
Yeah.
And I love the metaphor there.
I think I don't know how true this is, but I think I read this that Bong Joon Ho didn't tell Robert Pattinson which version of Mickey he'd be playing until just maybe minutes before the shooting of whatever particular scene they were doing that day, because he wanted to capture real, genuine confusion and fear and paranoia as much as he could. And if that was the tactic, that's a very clever way to do that. And I think it certainly helps amplify how good Robert Pattinson is here.
Yeah. I mean, he's one of the best we have working today.
He's so interesting.
He's really great.
And I will give the film credit on one hand here, because I did call some of its themes a little bit rudimentary or a little bit redundant. And that's not a bad thing. I think the movie does have an earnestness in conveying that. But where I do think there may be some provocative ideas here is the way it at least visualizes the idea of cloning, which we've seen before many times, and how the conversation can be had about whether, if two of them exist, are they still the same person? Are they actually separate entities? That's a conversation we've seen before on this particular topic, but Bong Joon Ho does a really great job shooting it strictly from Mickey's perspective. So when the multiples come into play here, it actually forces us as the audience to think of it from Mickey's perspective. Like, okay, these memories are constantly being transferred to him. He's still just one person. How does it feel? And what happens when all of a sudden there's two of them? Whose memories are now who? How has that been transferred? What has actually happened? Where's that disconnect now? So it gets really provocative from a scientific standpoint, which I thought was a neat way to go about a very familiar sci-fi idea. And I thought that was pretty neat too. And Pattinson also plays with that very well.
I agree. And I do think that is the main intent with those two characters. And I agree. I found that fascinating here. But again, I think that's why I'm so allured by the metaphorical angle of it, because I think you can watch this film and look at 18 as something that doesn't exist in a pragmatic way, that it's just part of a fractured identity.
Yeah.
And Mickey is having to fight against this other part of himself that wants to get away from his timidness, that wants to fight back, and he's not sure how to corral it. Like, I think you can look at the film through that lens and it works exactly the same. And that's how I viewed it, honestly. And I found that utterly fascinating here. But I do think that the main intent from a sci-fi perspective is more so what you're talking about, but that's where Bong gets to have his cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
And it's
the Flash failed, so this movie can succeed in that regard.
Exactly. It's really great. I do want to call out to Naomi Ackie as Nasha, who is really
She's great
here as well.
Yeah.
Love her dynamic with Pattinson, and their dynamic is crucial. It is vital. That romance has to work for this film to work, because this film is a romance at its core.
Especially when we don't really get much time with them at first. A lot of it is spoken to us from Robert Pattinson's own voiceover narration. So there's a lot of things that could block the romance from coming through, but it still does come through, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where the imagery is important. We get a lot of that voiceover narration, but during that sequence, Bong does show us that romanticism blossoming. And I love that moment of Nasha fighting to get into that little tube where Mickey is clearly suffering from some sort of gas that they're poisoning him with, and she just wants to be in there with him. Like, there's something about watching her fight for that is really endearing. That's really great. And yeah, I mean, it's coupled with some voiceover narration. When it comes back later on in the film, we see it a second time, and it is a bit humorous at first because you have the scientists taking selfies and glad that they're killing Mickey. But once you move away from that element, the camera just kind of pans into the two of them sitting in that container, and it is romantic and really endearing. So like the tone management of the film, which surprise, because it's Bong Joon Ho and this is what he is maybe a master at the most. It is impressive here once again.
This movie is wildly funny. Or maybe the better way to put it is I found it to be wildly funny.
Oh, I
because
agree. I think
yeah,
it's hilarious. Yeah.
it's the type of humor that won't work for everyone. It is very immature in many ways. I mean,
Mhm.
one of the funniest things I just had to write down was when Mickey is first being initiated as an expendable, and he's being initiated by, I forget the character's name, but I know it's played by Holiday Granger. Oh, funny. She's simply credited as Red Hair. That's her character name, is Red Hair. She pops a zit on his forehead, and his response as a voiceover says, "I'm glad you didn't know about the one on my butt."
Yeah.
Like, that's the type of humor we're kind of dealing with here. It's either going to work for you or it doesn't. It worked for me. I laughed a lot during some of these scenes.
I mean, I think about that moment when he is suffering after eating this meal with the marshals, and
Mm.
Kenneth is about to blow his brains out and put him out of his misery, and his wife is like, no, 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 and she's like, not on the rug. She's so
Oh, yeah,
concerned about the rug.
and it leads to this screaming match between Mickey 17 and 18 back in his, I don't know, his dorm, his room, whatever you want to call it. Another one of the funniest exchanges in the whole movie, just given how loud and boisterous Mickey 18 is in that moment.
Oh my
It's
gosh,
funny.
yeah,
It's
very
funny. It's not going to work for everyone,
Yeah.
but it's funny.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I very much enjoyed it. I very much enjoyed it.
How
I don't
does
know if
it
I can recommend it, but I loved it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I don't know if I can recommend it either. How do you rank it within Bong Joon Ho's filmography? At least maybe like spontaneously. I know you might have to give it some thought.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Parasite still is going to be number one for me.
Okay.
I mean, I have to get it. Man, I don't. Parasite number one. Memories of Murder probably number two. I am admittedly struggling here because I really love Mother. I think Mother is so underrated and doesn't get talked about enough as far as Bong Joon Ho goes. I understand Parasite, of course. Memories of Murder gets talked about a lot as well, and I totally understand. I think Mother's honestly just as good as both of those movies.
Mother is my number one. That is my favorite
Yeah.
Bong Joon Ho film, probably followed by Parasite.
Yeah. I might go Parasite, Mother, Memories, and I hate to cling to his more, again, I hate to use this term, but his more like serious work. But man, those three movies are phenomenal. Really, really great. Mickey might be number four though, just underneath that. And I still really like Snowpiercer. I really like Okja as well. I will defend Okja. I think it's great.
I like Okja. Yeah.
But Mickey 17, again, off the cuff here, have not wrestled with this whatsoever. I'd probably put it at number four.
Okay. I haven't seen Barking Dogs Never Bite yet, his first film, which apparently Bong Joon Ho himself has even said you don't need to see it. Apparently, he's not even proud of it. So
We'll
the
take
other
his word on
seven,
that then.
the other seven films in that regard, if I had to put Mickey 17 anywhere, just very quickly, I'd probably put it around number 5. Of his English language films, I do prefer Snowpiercer by a slight margin.
Okay. I mean, that film also rules.
Yeah. Well, I think tonally too, I think that one's very tricky because it kind of gives us the best of both worlds with Bong Joon-ho. It gives us the potential weirdness and daringness that movies like Okja and Mickey 17 have, but it still feels in keeping with the self-seriousness of movies like Mother and Memories of Murder.
Yeah. I was going to say, it doesn't quite balance the same extremes as Mickey 17.
No, like in a way, Snowpiercer is kind of the best middle ground movie that he has made, kind of the best buffet movie of his as far as bringing all of his sensibilities together. And I think that movie is surprisingly seamless in that way. But I mean, I like I said, I haven't seen Barking Dogs Never Bite. I am curious to check that one out to see if I even enjoy it. But if I do end up enjoying that one, the guy's got no misses. He really doesn't.
No,
even a
I
movie
agree.
like The Host, I love. I love that one as
really
well.
like The Host as well. Yeah, Snowpiercer is certainly right there as well. And he should honestly get bonus points for getting that kind of performance out of Chris Evans that honestly we just haven't seen outside of the MCU. Like Bong Joon Ho is the only one that's gotten a decent performance out. I guess he was good in Knives Out. His little Knives Out.
I was trying to think
role,
what
I
else.
was really
Okay,
fun.
so Snowpiercer, Knives Out. Was there anything else that Chris Evans was in?
Nothing
where
that comes to mind. Not
there was that movie.
immediately,
There was that
anyway.
movie Gifted that I didn't care for, but I thought he was fine in it.
Yeah, he was fine in that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like we're talking about someone that was essentially a movie star for a brief moment in time,
For
and then
sure.
couldn't recapture that if he wasn't with Marvel unless a real director got to work with him.
Yeah, for sure. But I really like Snowpiercer a lot as well. Do not get me wrong. It could be that Mickey 17 is fresh. I also think about the challenges of Mickey 17 tonally, because Snowpiercer equally not all that subtle in its commentary. It is really great in terms of capturing the tone that it is going for. I just feel like Mickey 17 is just slightly more ambitious in that regard, and I think
Yeah, it's
nails it.
it's quirkier for sure, which is why I think I might revisit it more than some of his other ones, and that
Yeah.
just gives it a rewatchability for sure.
Well,
And
Snowpiercer is for all the lack of subtlety in his movies, but Snowpiercer is quietly kind of quirky.
Oh, it's very quirky, but it's also frightening. And I'd
Yeah.
say, and certainly by comparison to something like Mickey 17, the way Snowpiercer ends does leave you with a lot of questions. There's actually a lot of nuance to
That
that.
ending rules. It is so
It's
good.
so good.
Oh my god, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the best final lines in any Bong Joon Ho film when
I
Ed
love
Harris
it.
just simply says, "Nice." I
Yeah.
love that. Absolutely love
So
it.
good. Yeah, I mean, I love him. I love him as a director. I completely with you. No misses of the main seven. Again, if we're disregarding Barking Dogs, as he says that we should,
hmm
then yeah, no misses.
Yeah, I
they're
think
all really
it was even pretty recent. I think there was a double feature playing not too long ago. When I say not too long ago, I mean maybe a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago. A double feature of Barking Dogs Never Bite and Memories of Murder that I think he helped host, and I think he even said that he wouldn't blame the audience if they just left after Memories of Murder. I think that's what he ended up saying.
Yeah. As far as a final thought, I kind of want to go back to Dave's review on the website at InSessionFilm.com. Because
Okay.
earlier in this conversation, we were talking about the discourse around this film and the idea, because a lot of people have been joking about, again, when you look at the parallels to Mark Ruffalo and his performance and who he's representing here, and how the film crystallizes with this rebellion that takes place there. There's been a lot of jokes around that in the film. And again, I'm not urging violence by any stretch of the imagination. But as far as fighting back against that kind of suppression, again, broadly speaking, I think Dave does a really great job of articulating that in this film in a great way, where he ends his review by saying, he mocks, speaking of Bong Joon Ho, he mocks those in power while still remembering that many of them are to be feared. But he never forgets that to move past our fear, we must have something worth fighting for. As long as we have each other, we cannot be defeated by the elite. There is a way out and forward. I thought that was a great way to kind of articulate both sides of this film in terms of he is mocking those kinds of leaders for sure. There's no doubt about that. There's no ambiguity to what Bong Joon Ho is doing in that regard. But again, circling back to the sincerity of the film is absolutely reminding us that there is something worth fighting for. That's why the romance of the film is pivotal here. And that's why the sincerity of the film is pivotal. That's why Pattinson's performance in that spectrum, that duality of those two characters, that's why it's important. And ultimately, I think that's why the film gets to have its cake and eat it too.
Earnestness
And,
trumps all, pun intended.
I love it. No, it's great. Yeah. So that is Mickey 17. I really liked it a lot. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, you can reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right. I do want to reiterate that we have a second review coming out this week as well. We're going to be talking about, I don't know how to classify it still, an animated film, animated / live action. It's weird. We'll talk about it, but the film Love Me.
A robot
also
love
starring-
movie.
Robot love movie. It's that one is also about love. It's just a romantic week here at In Session Film.
It very much is. Sci-fi romance is in the air.
Sci-fi, romantic, weird movies. Co-starring Stephen Yeun. That is the theme of the week.
That's a heck of a theme, man. If we get that every year, we might have a new top 3 list that we can talk about.
I know, seriously. We have to be looking for these more.
Yeah.
But we're going to have a conversation on that, so be on the lookout. Episode 627 is available. Right now, you can go and check that out, where Brendan and I talk about the best shots of the 2020 so far. We had a great time going through those. We, of course, continued our Best Picture movie series with Lawrence of Arabia. Had a great conversation on that iconic masterpiece of a film as well. And my essay on After Sun is available at InSessionFilm.com. It did go
Great
live.
piece. It's a great piece,
Thank
man.
you. I appreciate it. I do hope people go and check it out. I did put a lot of time and effort into it, so I hope people get something out of it.
Well
at the
done.
very
Please
least.
read it. Please read it, everybody.
Thank you. All right. Well, with all that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Bong Joon Ho.
You're so fine. You're so fine. You blow my mind. You make me